Hello and welcome. This is Isle of Wight Guru's guide to which town on the Isle of Wight you should stay in. You can have a look at our website, which has got way more detail than we can go into here. That's isleofwightguru.co.uk, as you may have guessed. But let's plough on with the first of 5 options that we're going to discuss. And option number 1 for you is Sandown and Shanklin. Now these are your classic English seaside resorts. This is a real bucket and spade sort of place. So if you like Weston-super-Mare and Eastbourne and Blackpool and places like that, then I would say Sandown and Shanklin will be good choices for you. There are loads of hotels, loads of guest houses, loads of bed and breakfasts, all that sort of thing. There's also camping, holiday parks, all that sort of thing. And also on the seafront you will find that Shanklin, for example, has got 3 mini golf courses. Sandown as well has got another excellent mini golf course, so you could do a tour really of mini golf courses if you were so inclined. There is also things like a pier in Sandown, there's amusement arcades, there's loads of places selling chips, all in Sandown and Shanklin. However, Sandown and Shanklin may not be for you if you think that sort of thing sounds awful. You might prefer to get away from it all, and so the Isle of Wight has got plenty of those as well. But Sandown and Shanklin, I'll put some links in the description to some suggested places that we think are good places to stay in Sandown and Shanklin. And finally, I will just say, of the 2, I prefer Shanklin. Sandown did win an award a while ago as the UK's best beach, according to Countryfile magazine. But I just think Shanklin's a little bit more charming. It's got a thatched village. Some of Sandown's seafront has got some sort of closed hotels at the moment, which looks a bit less appealing, but other parts of Sandown are much better. But anyway, Shanklin is my favourite of those 2. Okay, option number 2 for you is the South Wight area, which is obviously the area of the Isle of Wight furthest away from that mainland. And if you head south, you will find places like Ventnor, Bonchurch, Knighton and St Lawrence. And the South Wight has, well, Ventnor itself is a sort of Victorian resort, kind of similar to Shanklin maybe, but it's on a very big hill, so that gives it a really nice feel. It's quite sheltered and tends to be not too windy down in Ventnor. Ventnor also has got a bit of a nice sort of bohemian artsy feel to it, lots of places to eat, and it's also got a botanic garden which is quite famous. The rest of the South Wight is quite isolated, but it's quite charming at the same time. So there's a lot of very rugged beaches, which we spend a lot of time exploring. And you can go down to one of these beaches on an August Saturday lunchtime, and you will have this beach all to yourself. It really is amazing. And there's some beautiful, very hidden and secluded beaches in the South Wight. So what's the downside of the South Wight? Well, it's quite cut off, to be honest. There aren't a lot of petrol stations, there aren't big supermarkets. And if you are staying in Ventnor, it's probably a 45-minute drive from the ferry ports. Now, an Isle of Wight resident would not be driving 45 minutes without really planning ahead. This is a big deal. To you mainlanders, this may be a small matter, but if you want to explore the island, the South Wight is a little bit more cut off, I would say. There are buses, but not as many as you do get in the rest of the island. Okay, your third option is the West Wight. I have a real deep affection for the West Wight, partly because we've got a holiday let in Freshwater Bay, but I won't go on about that too much. The West Wight is really beautiful. It's probably the least developed part of the Isle of Wight. Really beautiful coastline. Compton Bay, where I proposed to Mrs. Guru, can be found in the West Wight. That's another beach that often wins awards. I think it was the Times Travel Supplement said that was one of the best beaches in the world. There's lots of other things going for the West Wight. The Needles, of course, is very, very famous, and that is in the West Wight. But apart from that, it's mostly an area we don't find loads of attractions. The West Wight is more about enjoying the great outdoors. There are some really lovely walks. My favourite is probably Freshwater Bay up to the Needles, but there are loads of really lovely walks around the West Wight, so it's popular with dog walkers and cyclists and that sort of thing. Having said that, there is actually quite a lot of places to eat and drink in the West Wight. You've got some nice seaside restaurants. There are some attractions in the West Wight. Tatnall Farm was one of our favourites. So it's not like there is nothing to do there. there's actually quite a few things, and there's a guide on our website called 20 Things to Do in the West Wight, and actually there's quite a lot to do, and we like the West Wight. It's also, it's a bit cut off in terms of transport and supermarkets and that sort of thing, but it's not that far away. If you were staying in Freshwater, for example, you're 15 minutes from Newport, which is the middle of the island. If you wanted to go across to Shanklin, it's probably 35 minutes. Ryde is similar, maybe 40 minutes. So these are not massive distances. As I said before, Isle of Wight residents, you get into a habit of only travelling a small distance when you live on the island, but actually we're only talking about half-hour drives to get to most places. So that's the West Wight for you. Okay, option number 4 is to stay in one of the larger towns. So we've got Cowes, Newport and Ryde. Now they're all quite different to each other. Newport is a kind of fairly typical market town. It's got a lot of chain shops in the middle of it. And to be honest, it's quite similar to a lot of mainland towns. So why would I suggest staying in Newport? Well, the advantage of Newport is that it's in the middle and it's probably got the best transport connections. So if you are here, if you're visiting the Isle of Wight and you are not bringing a car and you want to see the whole island, or even if you are bringing a car but you want to explore all 4 corners, then Newport's quite convenient. You can't really drive more than about 25 minutes before your car will fall off a cliff. So that's the advantage of Newport, I would say. Ryde is a similarly sort of large town. It's got a bit more of a seaside feel. It's got a few more seasidey type attractions. It's got a big sandy beach. It's not quite as sort of idyllic and quiet as some of the other places we've talked about. It's a fairly large town. So it's got a good choice of hotels, good choice of places to stay, that sort of thing. And one of the other big advantages of Ryde is it's really close to some of the ferry connections. So if you are coming across as a foot passenger, you can get a ferry or a hovercraft and you will end up in Ryde. It's very convenient, very quick and easy to get to. So some people might stay there for a weekend. And then there's also a railway which runs from Ryde and goes down to Sandown and Shanklin. So that's quite good if you want to rely on public transport. Cowes, I have a bit of a soft spot for Cowes. Cowes is a sort of yachting town. It's obviously famous for Cowes Week. It's a good sized town, but it's also got a bit of a yachty feel. There's a lot of quite nice independent shops in the town centre. Again, you don't get the sort of unspoilt crumbling cliffs that you would get in the West Wight, but it does have a nice seafront that you can walk along. You can see a lot of activity on the Solent. If you want a view of loads of things happening, then Cowes is a really good choice. In fact, anywhere along the north coast of the island obviously is good for that. If you want a view of miles and miles of nothingness, sparkling seas and maybe one ship out there, which a lot of people love, then the South Wight is much better for that. And Sandown and Shanklin will also offer you that. So that is one factor that people consider when they're deciding where to stay. And we have got a guide to places to stay in Cowes, 10 of the places that we think are really good, and I will put a link to that in the description. There's going to be a lot of links in this guide. Okay, your final option, option number 5, is the East Wight, but the villages and the coastal communities around the East Wight. So that is places like Bembridge and SEAVIEW and St Helens. Now I really like these places. I know I keep saying I like all of these places, but they've all got good things about them. So Bembridge, SEAVIEW, St Helens, Nettleston, that sort of area, they are really nice, quite posh places. There's some massive great houses on the seafront. Quite a lot of second homeowners live in these areas, not exclusively, but quite a lot of second homeowners live in these areas and come across. They aren't particularly hilly, so you don't get the great views that you get in Ventnor. In Ventnor, most of the houses have got a sea view, which is remarkable. The East Wight is a little bit flatter, but there's some really beautiful beaches around there. So Priory Bay is really beautiful. St Helens Beach is nice. Bembridge has got a couple of nice beaches, and you can do some good walks around there. And it's also, the East Wight isn't really as cut off as the West Wight and the South Wight, so you're quite close to Sandown and Shanklin and Ryde. It's all quite easy to get to. So it's pretty, but it's not unspoilt and undeveloped in the same way that the West Wight is. Okay, well hopefully that's given you some useful advice before you choose where to stay. As I've said about 84 times, isleofwightguru.co.uk has got loads more on this, including suggestions of where you might want to stay in each one. So have a look at our website. I'll put loads of links for you to look at, and I hope that's been some useful information, and I hope you enjoy your visit to the Isle of Wight.